Assalamu alaikum everyone, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video I'm making a dress from Asos, and it's called the soft denim square neck tea dress in mid-wash. It's also available in black. I brought 1.5 meters of this soft denim in mid-wash with some buttons. I folded my fabric over so I get 4 layers, and I'm cutting the bodice to start off with. For the length of the bodice I'm keeping 17 inches with seam allowance. So I'm going to separate the 2 layers. So I've got the back and the front bodies separate from each other. For this dress I'm making a size 10, so I was able to get the width that I need from a single fold. I'm separately folding the front and the back, and then I'm going to lay them on top of each other. And here I'm keeping a difference of 2 inches, so my front is going to be 2 inches wider than my back. I'm keeping the 2 inches extra for the front placket opening so we can put the button and the buttonholes. I'm turning it around so the folds are facing me, and we're going to mark the measurements on the back of the bodice. So I'm taking 8 inches for shoulder width and 8.5 inches for the armhole. I'm making a box and then making the armhole shape. For the neck I'm taking 3 inches in width and 2 inches in depth. For the shoulder slope I'm taking 1/2 inch slope. The bust I am taking 10.5 inches, and for the waist I'm taking about 9 to 9.5 inches. After we've done all our markings, we're going to cut the armhole and the waist and bust measurements and the shoulder slope. We're going to cut this back neck separately from the front. On the front panel I'm just going to mark a notch where the 3 inches for the neck is, and then you can cut out the back neck. So you've got your back and your front, and I'm just going to lay the back onto the front, and then the extra that we kept I'm just going to fold it in. Make sure that's nice and even and flat, because we're going to cut the front neck. And for the front neck the width is the same as the back, but the length of the neck I'm keeping about 8 inches. So it should be 3 inches from the top, and then you can mark 3 inches at the bottom and make your square neck. So I decided that the square neck is going to be too wide, so I'm making it a bit narrow, just taking about 1/2 inch away from the width, and then we can cut that out. If you're not happy with the narrow neckline, then you can go back and widen it a bit more. and then you can cut open the front fold. One thing that I forgot to do was deepen the front armhole, so I'm remarking the measurements that I used to cut both layers, and then I'm extending this line about 1 inch and then joining it to the top of the armhole. I'm making a new armhole shape and cutting that out, and you do this on the front panel. That is all your bodice cutting finished. So it's time to cut the skirt now. Firstly, I'm taking the length that I need, which is about 20 inches, including seam allowance. And again, I'm doing the same as I did with the bodice. I'm separating both the front and the back of the skirt, because the placket goes all the way down from the bodice to the skirt. And then I'm refolding both of them, and then I'm going to lay them on top of each other just like I did at the bodice. And keeping the 2 inches extra that I did with the bodice as well. So this time I'm facing the folded pieces away from me. I'm taking the back bodice because we want to keep the same waist measurements on the skirt. So I'll mark the same measurements on the skirt. And I'm just going to bring that to the end of the skirt. So I'm left with 13 inches, which is fine for a size 10. So I'm going to take that marking and join them both together. And then at the bottom hemline, I'm marking 2.5 inches for the bottom skirt curve. I think 2.5 inches was a bit deep. I think if you're going to do it, I'd recommend do about 2 inches, because this original design doesn't really have a curve. And then you can go ahead and cut the front fold. So you're done with the skirt cuttings, and we're going to move on to the sleeve cuttings. So I've taken 4 layers of material, and the measurements of these are 9.5 inches by 7 inches. I'm keeping short sleeves for this dress. So I've marked 3.5 from the bottom and 4 from the top, and making my armhole sleeve shape. And for the opening, I kept about 7 inches, I think, in the end. I didn't want it to be too tight. And then I cut that out. And that's all your cutting done. And we head up to the sewing machine. So at the sewing machine, I'm starting off with the bodice. I've taken both the layers, the front and back. I'm putting right sides together, and we're going to sew the shoulder seams first. The second step I'm going to do is I'm turning it around, and then I'm taking the skirt. You got the front and the back panels. I'm going to take the back panel first, and opening up the bodice, I'm going to place right sides together and make the waist seam. And I'm going to do the same for the front panel. I'm going to lay them out flat, taking the front panel skirt, which is in 2 pieces as well. What you've got to remember is the straight cut goes in the middle of the skirt, and the diagonal will go on the outside of the skirt. So we put right sides together and we make a straight stitch for the waist. And this is what it should look like. I'm going to overlock the whole of the neckline and the front opening, just to reduce the bulk of the material for when I'm sewing and folding. After I've done all the overlocking, I'm going to take 1/2 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to fold the neck and make a seam all the way round the neckline. And the next step I'm doing is I'm folding the opening about 1 inch from both sides. If you can see, I'm measuring from the overlocking seam, so just after the overlocking seam, but all in all it comes to about 1.25 inches from each side. This way it will sit nicely on top of each other. And I've also got to do a top stitch on the waistline, which I forgot to do. So I'm going to do a double stitch top stitch on the waistline. As you can see, I've taken out the pins from the front and I've ironed the opening flat. So firstly I'm going to do the top stitch, and then I'm going to make a seam straight down the front 2 sides. So this is where we are so far, and now it's time to do the side seams. So I'm going to take about an inch from each side and make a straight seam from the top to the bottom. So I'm turning it inside out, so the right sides are facing each other and making a seam. And we're going to do the same on the other side as well. So I did the same on the hemline. I overlocked the whole hemline just to get rid of the bulk of double folding, and I'm just going to take ½ an inch and fold it in and make a seam. So I overlocked the opening of the seam of the sleeves as well, and I'm going to do the same as I did on the hemline. So I'm just going to take ½ an inch and then fold that over and make a seam on both sleeves. And then I'm going to turn it inside out to make a seam on the width of the sleeve, depending on how much opening you want at the end. Side out, and then I'm taking the bodice, the wrong side out, and I'm popping the sleeve into the armhole so the right sides are facing each other, and then keeping the two seams together. And the notch that's going to hit the shoulder seam, we're going to make a seam all the way around the armhole. And the last thing to do now is the buttons and the buttonholes. So it's up to you how far you want the buttons apart, how big you want the buttons. So these measurements I'm taking in centimetres and not inches. So my button is 2 centimetres wide. So what I've done is that every 8 centimetres I've kept the buttons apart, and the width of the buttonhole is going to be 2 centimetres, same as the button. So I've taken out my Singer machine for the buttonholes, and I've placed the foot onto the machine foot, and I've set all my settings for making the buttonholes. So I'm taking my dress and placing the 2 centimeter line underneath the buttonhole. So we start off with step 1. When that comes to an end, we leave the needle up and turn it to step 2. After step 2, keeping the needle up, we turn to step 3, and then after step 3, keeping the needle up, we turn to step 4, and your buttonhole should be ready. The buttonhole, I'm going to get a pin and place it under step 4, and then take a seam ripper and then slowly and straight cut open until you can't cut anymore. And that should be the completion of your buttonhole, and then you can test it by placing a button through it and then make the rest of the buttonholes. So to measure where you're going to put the buttons, you can either measure it using the same method as you did with the buttonholes, or what I'm going to do is I'm just going to close the placket and just get a pen and poke it through the holes so I can see the dots that I've made on the other side of the placket, and that's where I'm going to place the buttons. And there you have your finished dress. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, give it a thumbs up, like and share and subscribe to the channel so I can bring you more tutorials like this. Thank you so much for watching.